So, whose agent is Donald Trump and what will Putin ask for in China? This and other topics we will discuss right now. My name is Irina Uzlova, and today with us, as usual, Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and Rashkin Report in English. Yuri, hello, glad to see you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
The supreme leader of the world's largest superpower is essentially working as a Soviet or Russian asset. Objectively speaking, the new US leadership is actually playing into the hands of the Russian Federation, strategically favoring its interests. Loud threats of tough sanctions are heard every day, but in reality, no real action, none. There are no American sanctions against the Russian Federation under the new president. Today, there will be 100 more statements. The situation creates enormous opportunities for Moscow, and what happens next could seriously change the balance of power. Europe underestimated Trump, underestimated Trumpism, and underestimated the risk that the balance of influence in the world could change dramatically. This was stated by Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa during a speech at a YES event at the Summer University, CNN Portugal reports. So, Yuri, I think that you can agree with this statement. Is Donald Trump really Soviet or Russian? Maybe not agent, but asset.
Just a well-wisher to the cause of Kremlin. No, I think it's on one hand very clear. On the other hand, it's kind of scary to admit. And I think that when we have President of Portugal saying these things that seem like 2 + 2 = 4, and yet we don't hear presidents of France or Chancellor of Germany or Prime Minister of Great Britain saying these same obvious things, just tells me that President of Portugal doesn't have the same negotiation requirements that are there for the French and German and the Finns and everybody else. Because I, as Yuri Rashkin, sitting in Wisconsin, can say it looks pretty obvious that our president is working very closely with the Russian side. In fact, he's been very clear about this for a long time, and his passion for Donald Putin, whatever, has been long, all over the place. Donald Trump's been saying that he's the only one who can make peace with Russia because he's got such great relationship with Vladimir Putin. This is not news. The news, I think, is when we have presidents, not Yuri Rashkin, not Yuri Filshtinsky, not somebody else, but president of a country, member of NATO no less, saying that this duck is walking and quacking and then really flying and acting like a duck. So maybe it's about time we should start calling a duck a duck. But when duck has nuclear weapons, is heavily armed, and could at any point join the Russian side because it feels disrespected, well, then you have choices. And if you're not going to be in the White House, in the Oval Office, surrounded by a gang of Trump supporters, they're telling you how you're not saying thank you enough for all the help that America is providing to you, then you can be brave and you can stand there and say that it's pretty clear that American president is acting as a Russian asset because 2 + 2 = 4. But if President of Portugal had to be there with President Trump in the Oval Office, I'd like to see him say the same things again. But on the other hand, perhaps it's a good thing that President of Portugal is not part of these negotiations so that he can say things that he really thinks without being overly diplomatic about it. Of course, I'm sure there's some kind of a context in all of this, and none of this happens out of nowhere, but it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is acting in a way that is going to be as helpful to Putin as possible. You don't have to be a lip reader to read that Donald Trump said to Vladimir Putin in Alaska, "I will help you," to see that even when President Trump gives weapons to Ukraine, there's also instructions about not using them or asking for permission anytime they're looking to use them, which means don't use them. This is the same thing Donald Trump did when he was president last time, when he gave Ukraine javelins, which were not allowed to be used against Russia. And the same thing we see now, where on one hand, here's weapons, on the other hand, no weapons. And how do you judge a statement by Donald Trump that you can't win any war without attacking the territory of your enemy, when we also know that this is a president that is not letting Ukraine do it? So this is more of an admission on Trump's part that Ukraine is in a difficult situation, and Trump is doing everything he can to take away Ukraine's cards that it has in order to stand up to Putin. So this is a kind of a, what do you call it, like a rotten fake casino where the tables are fixed. And that's in part why Donald Trump filed bankruptcy 6 times, because who wants to do business with him? Nobody. And we are now looking at a situation where many countries in Europe, and possibly not only, are now not going to be able to send packages to the United States. Now, if you're interested in the welfare of American people, that would be a problem. But if you are concerned about the welfare of American people, then perhaps the vaccination disaster that's unfolding in our CDC, Center for Disease Control, would be a concern. However, or perhaps the destruction of sciences that is occurring under this administration in the United States, if you were concerned about American people, those would be really big red flags that those are not things you want to do. However, if you are a Russian acting, quacking duck, then why not? Then perhaps it's pretty clear that if United States really kind of lost its statehood, sovereignty, independence to Russia, then of course, how could colony have the best medicine, the best science? No, the colony is not supposed to do that. And I think that's how Donald Trump is looking at United States, as a colony of Russia. Now, he might feel differently, but in essence, de facto, when you have a person who's an asset that you're calling an asset of Russia, what does that mean? That means that he's leading a country that's effectively becomes an asset of Russia. Now, that's the next level of truth that President of Portugal cannot say, but I, as an independent observer, can observe and say 2 + 2 = 4. If you're going to have a Russia's man in charge, at what point are we going to admit that we are now part of Russia? And when we have people in charge of our FBI, CIA, intelligence, military, everything, people that will only listen to Donald Trump and not to Constitution, it makes that signal that we are now part of Russia even more clear. Now, what will American people do about this? It's interesting to observe, because it turns out that being a part of Russia isn't by itself necessarily a problem. The problem is if we don't have access to vaccines, if we don't have a reliance on our financial instruments, those things like that will lead us to be poor and dead. That's a problem. So maybe it will just take a little bit of time when people will make the connection between our state of affairs in the United States, the mindset of our president, and what Putin is doing. Because when Putin is, attacking Ukraine mercilessly with ballistic rockets against apartment buildings, and United States is silent, that is another proof that this is what we're dealing with. Because if the person in the White House was more concerned about Americans and respect for America in the world, he would at least say those, words of concern that United States routinely gets kicked around for, because all it does is express words of concern. Well, guess what? We're not expressing words of concern now. Happy? No, because we still need to express words of concern. That's crucial. And the fact that we're not doing it while Putin is doing what he's doing, I think is another red flag and another reminder, to everybody, that Trump doesn't mind whatever Putin wants to do, because Trump likes Putin. Where's that tree on which it is just written out? Oh, wait, it's on every television all the time. Because we see that Trump hearts Putin through different ways. And I think that President of Portugal summarized it. And I hope that that elderly white man in Portugal can be that kid that points a finger at the emperor and says, the emperor is naked. The emperor works with Russia really well. And maybe that will be the moment, the tipping point at which the rest of the world will say, yes, thank goodness President of Portugal pointed out what we kind of knew all along and said it, because now it's truth. Well, there is an interesting example, precedent for this, which is the Spanish flu, which was a terrible pandemic that affected the United States and most of the rest of the world about 100 years ago. The reason it was called Spanish, not because it started in Spain, but because Spain was not part of World War I, and so they did not feel need to politicize the situation, and so they just admitted, here it is. And of course, everyone goes, great. This is Spanish flu now, even though, everybody had it. So now we have like a Portuguese conspiracy theory, because Portuguese decided to admit that Donald Trump acts like a Russian asset, and that's what we're seeing. So, those Portuguese. First, Spaniards bring us the flu, and now Portuguese bring us more truth. Can we handle it? I don't know, because admitting that your president is actively working with the president of another country, again, it's really unpleasant. It's really kind of borderline scary to admit it. But what gives me hope is seeing average American encounter their average congressman at an average town hall and yelling at them to get their head out of president's ass. Pardon my expression, pardon my English, but that's what the voters are saying, and they're concerned. And so for whatever reason, whether it's because President of Portugal said so, or because an average American voter says, you are not concerned about our wealth and our health, you are concerned about enriching yourself, people around you, and helping Russia, that realization, one way or another, it has to come to everyone. Of course, President of Portugal can just, admit it and then move on with his day and hopefully continue to help Ukraine. Americans are in a little more difficult situation because we now have to wait until elections. And we see that Republicans are struggling, Republicans being Trump party, because he kind of owns it, so it's his. And Republicans are struggling because Trump is acting in a way that disregards the will of the American people. So there should be consequences. There will be consequences. We see special elections. The Republicans lost in Iowa, where a Democrat beat a Republican by 11 points or 10 points, where Trump won by 11 points. So there's all sorts of good signs. But we also see that this is how dictatorship develops in every country. This is a step-by-step process that, they should have like a textbook for authoritarians. And on one hand, we're waiting and preparing for next elections, but at the same time, we understand that this president already lost power once, and he didn't like it, and he will not want to lose power again, and he's doing everything in his ability to both stay in power and to keep House of Representatives under his control, because if Democrats gain control of House of Representatives, it won't be just President of Portugal that will be saying that this man is an asset of Russia. It will be the entire Democratic Party and many people in the United States. But I think it is just realization that is very troublesome and a little bit intimidating that is needing to be made. So thank you to President of Portugal, and we'll see how long it takes before everybody's singing the same tune.
Yes, and Yuri, today I also remembered about the drug test, and we discussed this drug test and Trump in this context earlier. And you are quite right that after the bombing of Kiev, Trump is silent at all. At least he loves 100 statements a day, but now no words. Why? And where are the consequences to Putin from Trump?
Many people were wondering what would happen when Donald Trump is told no. And now we see that this is what makes an emperor naked, is that he doesn't see it. He doesn't see that he's having a problem. He doesn't acknowledge it. This is just or he will find an explanation that these are the finest materials and the finest clothes. What can you expect? Also known as, well, Ukraine is attacking Russia oil refineries, and therefore, what do you mean, therefore? That therefore
Yes.
Russia is justified in attacking apartment buildings and killing children?
Children.
This
2 years old.
this is right. This is the equation that makes sense to Donald Trump. But when he says things, it makes sense to him and maybe people who are listening to him, his base. But many, many more people look at this and say, this is nonsense. This doesn't make any sense. You can't equate destruction of the war machine that Russia is and compare that equated to attacks on apartment buildings and killing children in Kiev and elsewhere in Ukraine with ballistic rockets. Also, I consider it to be a giant fail on the part of Putin's war machine, because no matter, and in all honesty, no matter how many attacks Putin has and how many apartment buildings he sets on fire, Ukraine is not going to surrender. Because the goal here is that all of this is supposed to put pressure on Ukrainian people, to put pressure on Zelensky to say, oh, Vladimir Vladimirovich, you are so great. We are so weak. Please, please, let's make peace on your terms. And by the way, here's my head on a platter. It's not going to happen. So this is it's a losing idea that only makes Putin look terrible, which not news, and it makes America and the United States and our president look really, really terrible. Is a big understatement. This is a big shame, really. It's a shame on the United States that we are seeing what is happening in Ukraine, and we are acting as if we're okay with it, as if this is an expected outcome for what happens in a war. So this is not going to help Putin. It's going to hurt the image of the United States, destroying the image of the United States the same way as Russia destroyed its reputation. I don't know if it ever had one, but whatever. Less of it left than ever. And it's not going to help, because Ukraine is not going to surrender, but Putin's war machine can be weakened. Now, I'm concerned that it is currently only 17% of Russian capacity that has been destroyed by Ukraine. Because my question is, what is the percentage at which your Russian war machine will stop and cease? Is it 50%? Is it 90%? What else needs to happen? But perhaps we'll know more in a couple of weeks.
So Yuri, really, and how do you assess our strikes on Russian oil refineries? To my humble opinion, it's the best sanctions ever, the strongest sanctions.
That's one way to put it, because all sanctions are supposed to weaken, debilitate, and to make the war ultimately too costly for Putin. The idea has always been that at some point Putin is going to say, ooh, this is too expensive for me. I can't stay in this casino. I better go home. I don't know what I was thinking. And just retire. I'm off to monastery. Not going to happen for a variety of reasons. And I think that the pressure that Ukraine is, like you said, is really the sanctions and strikes altogether. It's pressure. And pressure needs to be put on Russia one way or another. And so, yes, if Donald Trump is looking to ease the sanctions, ease the pressure, not follow the sanctions, then yes, the pressure is going to come from Ukrainian armed forces, and it's going to be even less pressure on Ukraine, knowing that it is doing all of this with Ukrainian weapons. Not, God forbid, this is American rocket that has to be kept safe for future use by I don't know what, but this is it's reality that is happening with Ukrainian armed forces, Ukrainian strength. I think very important part of continued pressure, since we see that Donald Trump projects weakness in every possible way, is whether he will be able to withstand his own agreement that he's made with European allies to provide European allies with 3,300 ERAM rockets, which then European allies will I don't know, give to Ukraine. But of course, Donald Trump is too weak to actually just give it to Ukraine directly. So he has to do it, so Putin doesn't get mad at him. All right. So then we're going to see, is this actually going to happen? Or is there going to be some kind of delay, or there's going to be some kind of a tag on it, do not use against Russia? So those are part of the quacking experience that we're trying to see all the time, as Europeans are constantly hoping that this is just an ugly duckling, that he's suddenly going to turn into a swan, or at least, prevent him from going to Putin. But I think that this Iran rocket scenario is going to show us realistically, is Trump showing any willingness to provide pressure on Putin, backhanded though it may be, through the allies, because he's a little, cowardly, to do it directly, help Ukraine? Or is he going to, again, disable that aid in some way, even though Iran rockets are just as necessary for the United States, because Ukraine is now not just our battlefield, but it's our testing ground. United States is understanding that these types of rockets is what's likely going to be needed if, let's say, there's an armed conflict between China and the United States. So this is not even about Russia. This is about that. Remember China, that the United States under Donald Trump is so concerned about standing up to? Well, here's an opportunity. If we stand up to Russia, that would be just like standing up to China, only less expensive. So maybe if we could do it that way, and we could see those rockets in the battlefield, they will provide some pressure on Russia that, those darned sanctions just don't work anymore. It's a good thing that most of the sanctions really come from European Union, which seems to have no interest, I don't know why, of removing the sanctions altogether. So I think pressure is being applied, and more pressure can be applied, yes, by sanctions, but I think that American sanctions at this point is a lost cause, and with weapons, because whether Putin likes it or not, I think there will be a moment where he will press the gas pedal and nothing will happen. And whether Ukraine has to destroy 17%, 50%, 90%, or 100% of Russian oil capacities, the better it is, really long term, because Russia really should figure out how it can function without its oil refineries, because that is just a recipe for dictatorship pretty much in every country. So I think those are just some of the things that we're observing. Should acknowledge India. Poor India got slammed here with sanctions that should have been against Russia. But, Donald Trump, Russia, So instead, he decided to hit India. And we'll see, because this is a really nice opportunity to lose India as a partner, because, boy, United States is sure looking difficult to get along with these days. But no worries, because Donald Trump's former head of an HR department in the White House is now being promoted to be the next ambassador to India. Sergio Horokhovsky, I don't know, a man with questionable ties to, I guess, this country, with stronger ties to Malta, Israel, and Russia, although Uzbekistan is where he was born, in Tashkent, isn't part of Russia. He got that one right. Part of Soviet Union, though, was. Oh, well. So this man is now going to be Trump's ambassador to India. A 38-year-old with no experience whatsoever in India, per se, that we know of. I don't know how Malta seems, closer to the United States, but not close enough. But Sergio Gore has a really good connection with Donald Trump. And that's really the most powerful connection you can have now. You don't need to know anything about India. You just need to be on good terms with Donald Trump. And now Indians are being told that this is a big promotion, really, because you're getting somebody who is really can get in touch with Donald Trump anytime, day or night. What could be better for India? So this is who Donald Trump is willing to fight with. Oh, he's also willing to fight with Cracker Barrel, which is a restaurant chain in the United States. They decided to change their logo, and Donald Trump decided that he had an opinion, and he decided to weigh in and say that they should go back to the old logo, and they did. Wow. I think he should get a Nobel Peace Prize right there. Maybe Cracker Barrel will nominate him.
Really, Trump can hit India by tariffs, but China still without tariffs at all. And Putin and Lukashenko are going to China. What will they ask for there, and how will Donald Trump like it?
Well, I think when it comes to China, Donald Trump ran into an interesting problem, and that is he needs China, and specifically, he needs those rare earth minerals, and specifically, he needs those darn magnets that go on American jets, the F whatever, and in our rockets. Apparently, it's a very important part of our military, like a lifeblood line that we need to have those magnets. I'm not a specialist, as you can see, but Donald Trump already now is saying that he wants to get these magnets from China. Otherwise, it's 200% tariffs on Chinese whatever. I think that this was another just a beautiful demonstration of how Trump operates. He decided to have this war with China, thinking that in his mind things are going to work out a certain way. Turned out his mind doesn't match reality. And so whatever he thought he was going to get, he now has a situation that is very stressful and putting a lot of pressure on him, because these darn minerals and these magnets are very, very important, more so than perhaps he realized, understood. Of course, Ukraine gave him, access to all those rare earth minerals. Maybe if he could just help Ukraine to, push back on that, what do you call them? Russia, then maybe he could get those rare earth minerals. He could have those magnets, wouldn't need China anymore, and could have other the things that he could leverage with China instead of just deleverage, just showing his vulnerabilities, and the emperor is naked once again. The challenge with those rare earth minerals, just for a second, is that there's Greenland. Which is appearing very attractive still. We haven't heard much about Greenland lately, except that there is a story in, I can't even tell if it's Greenland or Denmark, the press saying that Trump's people are in Greenland, and they are looking to find stories of bad behavior by Denmark and organize the secession movement in Greenland and find politicians that they like. So Trump is going to be doing Trump things, and he's mostly going to be doing them for now in the northern, North America hemisphere, North America, right? Yes. And China in this situation has, they're just being patient. They're not really, their challenges are not as big as American challenges, because we're a consumer culture, and China is a communist state that is not concerned about these trade wars that America, that consumer country, decided to wage against totalitarian dictatorship. Mm-hmm. So I think this is another problem. And what is Putin going to do? Putin is going to, I think he's actually moving on up. Vladimir is, because prior to Trump's election, Putin was just, another crazy guy hoping that China will support him because he's a dictatorship. China is a dictatorship. Dictators should stick together. Otherwise, America wins. It's all good. But now that Putin is appears to have, a very good asset, if we can trust the president of Portugal, then Putin's stock is kind of moving up in the eyes of China, because maybe Putin is so crazy, but he's got President of the United States on a short leash. So that kind of makes him more valuable. So I think that Putin's stock is rising, and now China should be more interested in trying to use that relationship with Putin to navigate its trade battles with the United States. Mm-hmm. A little confusing, but that's what happens when we have, instead of democracies and dictatorships, we just have people who are wanting to be dictators, or as in case of Trump, I guess we'll have to all beg him to be a dictator, and then he'll agree. But the thing is that they also get into arguments and fights, and Stalin and Hitler in the end, got into a big war. So what I'm wondering is, at what point is Trump going to turn on Putin? And I think that one of the things that Trump really doesn't like, and he's very concerned about, is he wants to really assure that he has power in the United States. We know he's vulnerable because it still is, at least technically, democracy with elections. That means that Trump's people could lose. He could get another impeachment if House of Representatives goes, so there's all sorts of political complications that Donald Trump, poor Donald, still has to deal with. But I think that if Democrats, who at the current time don't seem to want to have anything to do with Russia because Russia is, attacking Ukraine and all sorts of horrible things, but if there was a sign that Putin was helping Democrats, I think this would be a moment where Donald Trump would say, Vladimir, I expected better of you. I have, this political thing to deal with, and you are going behind my back. But Democrats currently are not interested in working with Kremlin. So I think all we can do is just spread nasty rumors and see what happens, because Donald Trump really, really, really values good relationship with Donald Putin, and the only thing that he doesn't like is betrayal. So let's see how Putin will betray Trump.
Mm-hmm. And we see that Xi Jinping's cunning plan can work. Want peace at any cost. Trump is not satisfied with Zelensky and Europe's proposals to end the war. He simply wants it to end, and it hardly matters how. The Atlantic writes about it, citing a senior U.S. administration official regarding President Trump's position on a peace agreement in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Trump believes that both Kyiv and European capitals are taking an unrealistic position by insisting on the full restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity. He is convinced that such a demand only distances the prospects for peace, and in private conversations he has repeatedly stated that Ukraine will have to lose some of its territory. So really, he doesn't care at all, but we care.
Yes, and what's more interesting, and Donald Trump doesn't really want to know this, I think, but Ukraine doesn't need Donald Trump to capitulate. Like, Ukraine can capitulate on its own just fine, and that's not going to help Donald Trump get his Nobel Peace Prize, and that's really what he seems to be interested in. He just wants to end this inconvenience thing here called war and make money and get his Nobel Peace Prize, and everything is set up. Realistically speaking, it should have happened long ago. But once again, realism runs into reality. And reality is that Ukraine is not interested in surrendering and capitulating, and Donald Trump is showing himself to be an unreliable partner, an unreliable supplier, not a leader of the free world, and it's and he's okay with it, because again, if we're talking about somebody who looks up to Vladimir Putin, to what extent is he going to look up to Vladimir Putin versus positioning the entire country that is looking up at Russia and says, oh, Russia, what would you like to do next? Would you like to attack another country, Moldova, Poland, perhaps Baltic states would be interesting for you, because that's the kind of country we are now. We just want peace or Russian peace, which doesn't matter as long as Donald Trump is doing well. Again, this is not America that we're used to, but I think it is important to admit that this is what we have, not so that we would kind of lower our arms and hands and say, well, this is what we got. But no, because we need to admit what we have so that we could resist, so we could work to defeat it. Because if we are going to be denying the fact, then it's going to be very hard for us to come up with a good defense and good resistance. So I think let's just acknowledge that Donald Trump loves Putin and wants to do whatever Putin does. And that means that Putin is going to be first and Trump is going to be second, and Russia is going to be first and the United States is going to be second. And that's the way it's going to be until we decide that we don't like it and we want to make it differently. As a famous song in Russian rock song says, this music will be eternal, followed by if we change the batteries. And I think that this is what it's all about, because this music will be eternal, but only if we change the batteries and recharge it and let it continue. So I think that Donald Trump is going to be quacking and asking for what seems realistic to him, which is Ukraine should have agreed with Putin right off the bat and surrendered. I mean, if Donald Trump was president of Ukraine, he'd surrender to Putin real easily. So that, I think, also should make Americans worried, because I think we like having Alaska. But we'll see. I think that this budding relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin is far from done. And how it will end, if Donald Trump will end up in Rostov with Yanukovych, or in Moscow with Sadat, the fate of people who are trying to destroy democracy, Ukraine has showed us the way. And I think that's part of the reason that Ukraine is so important, is that this is a country that defeated its dictator and where people stood up to him. The only question is, can we in the United States do this, standing up to our wannabe totalitarian dictator, without having Maidan, without having, well, I guess we want to have the right kind of orange revolution.
I think you can, because recent polls show Trump's approval rating has fallen to as low as 37%, with several measuring around 40%. So we see that this falling. And what factors do you believe are driving this decline, especially among independent voters?
I think it's pretty clear that most people don't like Donald Trump. But I think that his base continues to like him and worship him, and don't even mind it if he wants to run for third term. I look as an example, frankly, at George Bush Jr., who had problems, who barely won a re-election after 9/11, and all the rallying around the flag that occurred. He was able to win re-election, but after that, he looked like a lame duck, because in the United States, when you're term limited, that means your second term, you won, congratulations. Now you're a lame duck, because now it's going to be raised for who is going to be the next president of the United States. And George Bush Jr. lost a lot of his support through different things, but two things that really hit him hard one was Katrina, which was a huge hurricane that basically wiped out a big chunk of New Orleans. And that really showed George Bush as very weak president. And then a mortgage collapse that we saw in 2007, 2008, where a lot of Americans realized that they could be, having major financial difficulties, because because when economy is held together by credit, and credit is frozen, credit's unavailable, a lot of businesses went out of business, and it was a big challenge. And that's when we saw George Bush, who survived Katrina, who survived mortgage meltdown, and was not running any advertisements for future election because he was done. At that point, I think he left office with high single digits or low double digits support. Seeing how Donald Trump still has 37% tells me that there's a lot of Republicans in this country, and it's going to take something more for them to realize that this man is not Messiah and is not going to solve their problems, and is only going to make their lives worse, because the first people that dictators attack are always their own. And so the result of Trump's big, beautiful, whatever law thing that he passed is that rural communities where a lot of his supporters live are losing financing for the rural hospitals and beyond, because this is the result of his actions. It's going to take a while. We see that Donald Trump never stops the election process. And in fact, they're even discussing having this never happened before, midterm conventions for parties, because this is the perennial election climate that Donald Trump wants to maintain. Because, if you're not going to run advertisements, people might not like you anymore. So I guess you have to run advertisements all the time, have Fox News on all the time, and then you can still manage only 37% support, which basically means that Donald Trump's base and a few other people continue to support him, which just makes us wonder what's going to be happening with elections coming up, because the better his position is in the elections, the more likely it is that the election will occur. And the worse Republican Trump's position standing is in the elections, the more questions there are whether he will do something to try to prevent his, another major loss. But this is the life and the world that we have to live in. And so on one hand, we have to prepare for elections. And on the other hand, prepare for possibility that Trump will try to do something to stop or limit people's ability to vote, as he is doing with changing districts, as they're doing with always trying to complicate ways for people to vote, especially in big cities. So Trump is aware of his popularity. He understands that if he loses House of Representatives, he will be impeached for third, fourth, who knows how many times. He commits crimes seemingly every day. So there's something that there could be an investigation by Congress if there was willingness, if there were Democrats, starting with the Epstein case all the time. But I think that Epstein case is the big unknown here, because everything else, Democrats are always about their health care and Republicans are always about their gun rights, no matter what happens in reality and, the things. But the Epstein case really tore a hole in his base. And so let's see what happens if that case can really substantially make him lose his support, or whether it's going to turn out that pedophilia was not the problem. The problem was that Epstein was working supposedly with servicing a lot of Democrats. And if it's not Democrats that are going to be punished, then we don't even want to hear about it. So that's what I'm really curious about the Epstein case. Is it about Democrats or is it about protecting children? So let's see how that situation unfolds. That's, I think, is a big unknown in the American politics, because we just don't know to what extent it's going to impact Trump, but it will impact him much more than Democrats. If he has 37% support now, only imagine what kind of support he will have in a year. But as is with George Bush Jr., we know that things don't stop. George Bush was losing his popularity right from the moment he was elected. But then 9/11 occurred, and it changed everything. So let's see what is happening, what is going to happen between now and elections. But if nothing changes, if elections were held today, Donald Trump would be in big, big trouble.
Yuri, thank you very much for your opinion and for your thoughts, for your time and position. See you next week. Take care.
Thank you and take care.
Yuri Rashkin, host of YouTube channel Rashkin Report and Rashkin Report in English. My name is Irina Uzlova. Guys, thank you for joining and watching us. Subscribe to our YouTube channels and see you later.